Hi everyone, today I will show you how to balance a stabilizer, in this case a Flycam C5 which I got very recently. Today I've got a Canon 550D/T2i and Canon 17-40 lens on it. I will explain why I decided to use this particular lens later. I also have an arm brace here which will help me hold this thing much longer. I will also come back to that a bit later. Everyone has their own way of balancing their stabilizer and I have my own. Some of you guys might not agree with the steps I take to balance it out, but this is my way, and this guide is aimed more at people who are just starting out with the stabilizers and with the balancing, and hopefully this guide will help you develop your own style and your own steps of balancing your stabilizer. This particular stabilizer came with 8 weights, 4 on each side, and for my previous video when I was using a Canon 5D I left 2 weights on each side and I had the pole extended to roughly halfway to get my balance right. But today I'm filming with my 5D and I have a 550D right here. This camera is slightly lighter than Canon 5D Mark II, so to get a balance right I will have to readjust it slightly. So one of the first steps that I take to balance out my stabilizer is to make sure that the weight on the top and the bottom is roughly the same. The bottom should be slightly heavier, but if we start with roughly the same weight, we're on a good track. So to check the weight balance, you would swing your stabilizer like so and you would let it drop. Well, this stabilizer doesn't drop. What this means is that the weight on this side and this side is pretty much equal, and although it probably looks quite cool, this is not the way to get your balance right. The bottom part of your stabilizer should drop within 2 to 3 seconds, like so, when you do this test. So to get this drop I need to extend the bottom pole. So for the purpose of test and understanding how this works, I've extended the pole fully, and let's see how long it takes for the bottom part of the stabilizer to drop now. 1, 2, it took roughly 1 second for it to drop to this position, and this is way too much. It should be between 2 and 3 seconds. I personally prefer around 3 seconds, so we need to do more adjustment to get this balance right. So next thing I will do is get this halfway down and see how long it's gonna take to drop down. 1, 2. Now we're getting about 2 seconds and we're definitely on the right track, but for me it's still not good enough. I would like to have a bit more than that. So I'm gonna shorten the pole even more. So let's see how long it's gonna take for it to drop now. 1, 2, 3. Maybe it takes too long now, so I need to extend it out again. So I've extended the pole by roughly 1 inch, and let's see what we're gonna get now. 1, 2, 3. So now it takes about 2-3 seconds to drop down, and this is where you want to be with a top to bottom weight balance. Next thing I would do is get the balance on the top of the plate, basically get the camera on the top balanced well, so when I hold it like that it doesn't fall to the front, to the back or to the sides. It's pretty decently balanced now, but just to show you what would happen if it was out of position, let me move the camera to the front, which is done quite easily with this particular stabilizer. Okay, so I'll move the plate to the front. So what happens here, the whole setup is slightly front heavy, and if I let it go, let's see what happens. This is where we're at. This is what we're gonna have as we walk around. Okay, so while our top to bottom weight ratio is correct now, the camera is too front heavy. While this could be useful if you are shooting just feet, this is not a right way to balance your stabilizer, and you really should get that balance right. So the first thing you would do is move that camera back slightly, maybe to the middle, and see if it drops to the back or to the front. Some of you might have your tripod adapters on the top there that will let you use your tripod plate, and maybe you would move that back to forth but basically you want to get that balance right, so when you hold it up like that, the camera doesn't drop forward or back. And because my actual camera body is mounted slightly to the back of the plate, I'm able to get the balance right. And if I had the camera body mounted straight to the middle of this plate, the whole setup would be way too front heavy, because the lens itself weighs a lot and it would just drop like that. So when you shoot with a DSLR, you want to keep the camera body somewhere at the back of your plate, whatever stabilizer you are using. And the last thing that you want to adjust on the top here is the side to side balance. Again, the camera is quite decently balanced at the moment because I was playing around with it earlier. Okay, so now I think I've got a pretty decent balance right here. Let's check this out. So when it comes to operating, one of the first things that you should know is that you should hold the handle on the side of your stabilizer, not at the back with your elbows right in your stomach, which is actually not a great way of operating. When I started out myself, I used to hold it like that, and I always thought, why it's so difficult. When I started using it like so, it actually became much easier and I felt much more in control with the rig. Learn to do it this way. You will learn much quicker to operate properly. So the second thing you should do when you operate is use your second hand. You don't want to use just one hand and let the camera go everywhere and anywhere. You will not be able to control what you're actually filming. So by placing two fingers on one side and your thumb on another, just under the gimbal, you can control the direction your camera is facing. And this is very essential when you want your camera to point forward, as let's say you walk behind someone, or your camera face to the side as you're walking next to someone, or maybe you will want to pan around as you walk around. So it's very important to use your other hand and not let the stabilizer just choose the direction itself. But it's very important to remember that with your second hand you should not actually support your stabilizer. You should not grab onto it really tight or hold it with your other hand, because then it ruins the whole idea of the stabilizer. When I started using this particular stabilizer about a week ago, I actually made exactly the same mistake. By holding on too tight to this post with my other hand, I introduced the side shake as such. It looked very ugly and I had to address that, so for the purpose of testing I actually used the stabilizer by itself without the other hand for a little bit, and there was no side shake at all. So I decided that I had to hold this post much lighter. You must only stop it moving around by holding your fingers ever so slightly. This way you're not going to introduce this side shake and it will really improve your shots. There are also a couple of other things that you can do to improve your shots. One of these is to use a wide angle lens. This will minimize any possible shake that you're gonna have as you walk around. With 28mm or wider, you'll get nice flowing shots, where with medium to telephoto lens starting from 50mm, it will be much harder to track a person, and every bump will be very evident, especially when you walk down the stairs or up the stairs or in any uneven terrain. Another good thing about using wide angle lens is that you will have more things in focus, and with a stabilizer you actually want to have more focus. You don't want to have too much shallow depth of field, because it will be very hard to track your object or your person that you are tracking. You must stay within the same distance from your subject unless you have a wireless follow focus. So it makes it much harder to track whatever you're tracking, and you can't actually go away from that subject and come in closer, because you're just gonna lose the focus, which will ruin the shot. So using a wide angle lens with an f-stop of around f5.6 or even slightly higher will ensure that all things are in focus and you can come away from your subject and come in a bit closer, and you will not lose your focus, which is very important and probably more important than shallow depth of field. Another thing that I personally use to help with my stabilizer shots is use an arm brace, which has a metal plate inside it. With an arm brace, the weight of the stabilizer is spread out across the arm, so it really helps get the smoother shots and keep going for much longer. I had a couple of shoots where I had to film with a stabilizer for a couple of hours, and this arm brace really saved my day. I highly recommend this accessory for whatever stabilizer you have. You can also buy a vest and a swing arm for your stabilizer, which will improve the shots even further and will spread out the weight of your whole stabilizer across the body. It's a very nice accessory, but usually these things cost a lot of money and they're not always practical. So for someone who wants to keep the setup down and are on the limited budget, this arm brace is a very good investment and I highly recommend that. The arm brace is not very expensive, but if you don't have money for it or you just don't want to buy it, I would recommend keeping your stabilizer setup as light as possible. So to get some weight off your stabilizer, you would extend the pole to its maximum length and then you would take off some of the weights from the bottom to get that 2 to 3 second weight ratio. I'm sure that if I had this extended to the maximum length, I could probably take 1 or 2 weights off and I would probably still get the 2 to 3 second weight ratio. The downside of that is that the whole setup becomes much longer, so it's much easier to catch it on something or bump into it with your leg. Any wind will obviously affect it much more. Okay, so I kept just one weight on each side on the bottom, and what happened with the whole setup is that it became too top heavy, way too top heavy. So now I'm gonna extend it to maximum and see if we're gonna be able to get that balance right with just 2 weights on the bottom. Right, let's get this 2 second drop test going. 1, 2, 3. So just like I said, I was able to take off another 2 weights of the bottom to make the whole setup even lighter, and I'm able to fly this thing with a minimum weight possible and still get quite a nice balance right there. If you want to keep the weight down even further, just don't use a zoom lens because they usually weigh much more. Just use a small wide angle prime lens. There are a lot of very cheap 28mm vintage photo lenses out there on eBay and elsewhere that perform quite nicely and are very cheap. It took me absolutely ages to film this guy today and it's actually getting very dark, so my last tip for getting a smooth shot with your stabilizer is to use a slow motion. If you have it available in your camera and if it's appropriate for whatever you're shooting, use it because it will definitely help you with your smooth shooting. It will create a very nice flow in motion, and whatever shake you had while you were shooting will be minimized because it will be slowed down and will be much less obvious. So thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope you found it useful and I'll see you in the next one.